Here we go. We actually get a game to review. UNLV All Access Podcast. One game is in the books. It's a win, 44-14. Bryant falls against UNLV. The Rebels come out strong in many ways. Well, we have some things to critique, and I'll tell you the whole time, second half when I was watching the game, and I was doing TV over on Silver State Sports and Entertainment Network. Caleb Herring is here, and, of course, former Rebel quarterback, and he was doing radio. I was thinking in the second half that while the coaches were probably frustrated during the second half and a little bit in the first with some of the defense, there were a lot of learning moments, and there's nothing better than winning easily, winning in a blowout, getting your backup quarterback in, getting some twos and even some threes in, but then having some really good moments for the ones to look at and go, you got to get better at this. So it was far from a perfect performance, which, I don't think coaches would be insulted by that. I think it's important to look at the game in its totality and get some lessons out of it, right, Caleb?
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things to do is to have success, but then be able to teach off of the success. I think the natural tendency is when you have a good game or you win a game, you think, oh, yeah, we're good. We got it figured out. But to win in what would, I guess, be blowout fashion and then still have so much to be like, that's not good enough. That's not the standard, right? And Coach Odom said some of those things in the presser. We watched some of those things live as it happened, and even in game, Coach Odom, going into the locker room with a shutout, right? At the point it was 24-0 going into the locker room at halftime, and he's like, "No, we weren't good enough on third downs." Like defensively, it's like, well, you're pitching a shutout, but no, that's not the standard. We got something to coach off of even at halftime, and definitely at the end of the game. So it's a tough thing to do to find that balance where like you have success, but you can coach still. Obviously, if you lose, it's like the message is received. We didn't do it right. But if you win, it's kind of hard to connect with players and say, we need better. Coach, we put up 44 points. No, we need better. And this is why. You have plenty of teachable moments on film where both sides of the ball, all three phases of the game can make improvements, even though, you still have a good feeling about winning the game. So 1-0, but with a lot to improve on. And I think that is absolutely the positive spin. Like a lot to improve on could be 0-1, right? And in this case for UNLV, they got the win and are going to learn from that film for sure.
So I have three positives from the game, but I want your three positives. So if you want to go through them one by one.
Yeah, so I think early, and maybe our positives kind of overlap, but early the run game, and I think that's always for me, like you look at football 101, the ability to control the trenches, and that's run the ball and stop the run. But the running game, I think 283 yards is, I think, the final tally for the game was established. And that's a credit to the offensive line because it wasn't one guy who rushed for 200 yards. It was like 5 or 6 guys who had multiple carries for 50 plus yards. And it was, I think, wonderful to see the offensive line control the trenches with all the talk about how the line was shuffling. So the run game being established and that being something that teams will have to worry about, it sets up so much more to the offense. I think the special teams, I can't go without mentioning that because for so much of the offseason, it was the point of emphasis, right? Like we talked about how special teams get more focus and Coach Shibes is one of the best in the country and they had the potential to be explosive in the kicking game. And they showed that. And we got kickoff return almost for a touchdown, about close as you can get without getting to the end zone. The coverage teams did a fantastic job of controlling field position. I think Bryant started field position inside the 20 just about every time that UNLV kicked it off. And it was great to see that from the special teams. That's one positive. And then variety. That was probably my biggest thing as a third thing. I mentioned multiple guys touching the ball in the run game. That was one of the keys that Coach Marion talked about offensively. He wanted to be able to have anybody at any time have an impact on the offense. And you saw multiple running backs. The rotation at running backs was amazing. You saw some receivers get touches. The ball was spread around pretty evenly throughout the evening. And then on the other side, multiple guys making tackles. I know there was a leading tackler. I think Jackson Woodard ended up with the lead in tackles with Thomas Anderson right behind him on the defensive side. But there was 4 or 5 other guys that have 5+ tackles. And even in that, even if he didn't get credit for a full tackle, I don't know how many times in the booth we looked and we're like, there's a scrum. You could credit anybody with that tackle. So variety on both sides of the ball was another positive for me out of that game.
Yeah, Barry Odom on Monday in his coach's press conference said the tackling he thought was average. So did you notice some weaknesses in terms of tackling at moments?
Yeah, I did, and I think there's a couple moments that I think were really glaring to me. One of them was a major conversion by Zevi Eckhouse, who was dead to rights sacked, and I think it was Jalen Dixon that had him in his grasp, and he slipped through. And because he slipped through, there ended up being, I think, a 30 or 40-yard gain on the other side, an explosive play for their offense that kind of injected some life. And I think they ended up going down and scoring their first touchdown on that drive. But if he gets that sack there, it one creates a negative play, which is something that they want to do defensively, is create negative plays and chaos and get offenses playing behind the chains. But two, it prevents a big play. And tackling was all that needed to be done there, just securing the tackle. And I think that kind of is probably some of the plays that Coach Odom's talking about, but the difference of good tackling technique versus bad, and the results on the field turn into things like that. If you're in position to make the play, make it. But I definitely think that was I wouldn't say a concerning area, because I think sometimes tackling can be a problem because over aggressiveness, if that makes sense, and trying to make big hits and trying to be so dominant in the physicality group. But there's other times when I think is a even more of a problem, when the tackling is bad because guys are afraid maybe to be physical or timid at the point of attack. And I don't think that's the case. I think what the issue with tackling at UNLV right now is just the basics of it, and just making sure you hone in on those details every single time you go to wrap somebody up. The physicality element, I think everybody that played displayed some physicality at some point, whether it's in coverage or coming up in the run fit. We saw safeties, and Jackson Turner was flying downhill. Jonathan Baldwin had a big hit coming down, filling the lane, and obviously Jere Williams on his blitzes. The physicality is there across the board. I think it's just fine-tuning the techniques. And it must be hard, because these days in fall camp, and it's not as physically grueling as it used to be. There's not as many live. I think there was two we know of live periods or live scrimmages that the team had to go on. And in one of those, Coach Odom mentioned that they weren't going to, low tackling, which is a part of the game. Some guys, that's their realm. That's what they do. That's how they tackle. They go low. So practicing it is a little bit tougher, and that's early in the season. You probably see some of that rust, and hopefully they have time to fix that. But tackling, I think I agree with Coach Odom. It could improve, let's say, in the future.
So my three positives, I thought the quick start was gigantic. Listen to Matt Neverett here, as he calls the 69-yard run by VD.
Give right off the bat is to Vincent Davis. He's got some space across the 30. Davis tackled. Now he's up and dangling towards the end zone. A first play touchdown for the Rebels. How about the start for UNLV?
That play was hilarious for me, and I think I mentioned it on the air on TV. I was down on the field, whatever it was, 2 hours, 90 minutes before the game, and I was walking behind Vincent Davis going up the ramp back to the locker room, and I'm like, man, he's got like a pretty noticeable limp. I think it was on his right leg, and then I looked down, and I'm like, oh boy, he just went 69 yards. I guess he's okay. I think the other two positives for me, the O-line got tested. I thought performed pretty well. We mentioned all the rushing yards. Pass protection was pretty solid. And keep in mind, Jalen St. John was not a go at left tackle. That's kind of important, right? Anton Ambule has moved up into that backup tackle spot, and he played the whole game, and he got a really good rating from Pro Football Focus. And then you didn't want to see this happen, but Alani Makaeli goes down in the fourth quarter, and I'll have to look at the total plays, but we had just seen Austin Boyd move up to the 2 at left guard. And then all of a sudden, the guy's in there in a Division I game when at the beginning of camp, he was pretty buried on the depth chart. So it was good to see both of those young guys get some experience. And the last one, and I think this one is important, I think with Arroyo and Keith Hayward before him, and there were multiple DCs, but I think the previous 2 years there was a good culture built in spite of not having all the dogs you need size-wise and depth-wise. I thought the program built a pretty good culture of short yardage defense when they needed to nut up. I can remember the UTSA game a couple of years ago. It was just like stop after stop after stop against Sincere McCormick, who was a great running back. But I think they've carried that over, and they carried it over in this game because the score could have been much different. There were some dangerous situations. Those middle of the field stops early in the game, those are such momentum changers. And after you get off to a good start, Caleb, and then you're breaking the back of Bryant as the guy. I thought he was doing the right thing. I thought Chris Merritt's playing the percentages. It's midfield. It's short. You go for it, and they just stymied him a couple of times. First half, 3 of 12 combined on 3rd and 4th downs.
Yeah, and the short yardage was great. I think they ended the game they gave up 1 4th down conversion of the 4 that they attempted for the whole game. And some of them, like you said, midfield, and then on the goal line even. I think is even harder sometimes, the mentality on the defense, because the end zone's at your back, right? It's not like the open field and the possibilities of play action or deep shots or whatever the case may be. It's mano a mano in a lot of ways down there. And it's a real test of the physicality. And like we talked about, the physical element is not missing from this defense. They absolutely love those moments when they're able to prove themselves. And they celebrate accordingly, right? They get the gravity of it, and they get fired up about those opportunities like they did last year or in seasons past. So I would definitely say that was a positive. And I think if you look at, situational football, oftentimes what that turns into is, can we stop the run? And not just stop it, but there's times where they dominated when they stopped it, like tackles for a loss. Jarrett Williams on the goal line stand ended up getting what would be considered a sack on the quarterback. And then there's another one in the midfield where it was a power run downhill, and they're able to get penetration and tackle for a loss and give the offense the ball back. So those are big plays. They don't count on the stat sheet as like interceptions or fumbles recovered or something like that, but they're turnovers. They're turnover on downs. The way they shift the field position, the way they shift momentum, those are absolutely turnovers. So, we forced an additional 3 turnovers based on the 4th down stops and the way they were able to handle those short yardage situations.
I'll give you some things that I'd like to see fixed, tweaked, that I think were issues. I already mentioned the tackling. It's funny in the positives, we didn't mention Jacob DeJesus. So this is going to be a really weak negative. And I think I can combine a couple of things here. I think they were holding some stuff back against Bryant for the future. I don't think they used DeJesus in the offense proper enough. I think he's going to get closer to 8 to 10 to 12 touches, or, part of the touches are throws, you know what I mean?
Right.
Targets. But I think they can use him a lot more. I mean, he's such a freaking difference maker. And with that, you tell me. I wanted to get on them for the lack of pass rush, but as I was watching the game, I was also thinking, I don't know if they're unloading everything they can unload, because we also know that Xavier Carter didn't get in for a while. He got in later in the game. So I guess 1, on DeJesus, you think they held back a little bit, and 2 was some of the pass rush stuff in terms of more complicated packages. Did they hold that back too?
I think so. I think both are true. I think week one for UNLV, I think there's an advantage to not showing all your cards, right? Or showing your whole hand, especially when you've got a tool like DeJesus, right? You're going to use him in so many different ways throughout the course of the season. And that's just, it's apparent that you have that ability because of how versatile he is. He's a receiver. He can run. He's in the return game. Like, he's going to have the ball in his hand. How you do that is the mystery. And that's what teams have to prepare for. Then you counter that with, you put on display a variety of other weapons that will complement him, or that he will complement going forward. So in running with Jaden Thomas and getting even Courtney Reese in the mix, and Donovan Lester and Vincent Davis. Now teams have seen, okay, these guys can be electric. These guys can make explosive plays. So you start to prepare for them. And then all of a sudden, you don't really know who the key guy is going to be for week to week basis. So, but I definitely think they held back, and in regards to DeJesus, and also in regard to the entire playbook and what the possibilities are with what they can do defensively. I think there may be 2 or 3 reasons why, but just a couple that I point out why the pressures weren't as dialed up, let's say, for the duration of the game versus Bryant. And one of them is, yes, you want to keep some things reserved for the future. But I also think it has to do with who they were going against. And it might be the case this week in preparing for Michigan, because you have a running quarterback. And when you realize the athleticism of the quarterback, the rush lanes and blitzing and getting pressure up the field, sometimes there's a hesitation to do that, because if he is to get past the first wave, like he did when Jalen Dixon had an opportunity to make the tackle, that second line of defense doesn't have eyes on him, and they're not able to get back to him before he rips off a huge chunk of yards. So those are some things, some reasons why potentially But I think when you don't have to go deep into your playbook, or you don't have to put out tendencies or film on what your blitzes want to be on 3rd and long, let's say, then you avoid that, because, like I said, most of this game is preparation. And if the other team, your opponent, doesn't have film on what you might do on 3rd and long, that's a positive for you going into that game. And then Coach Odom also mentioned too, they didn't put Bryant in a lot of negative situations to be able to dial those blitzes up. 3rd and long wasn't necessarily the norm for Bryant. So that maybe had something to do with why they weren't dialing up pressures, because it's not advantageous to blitz a lot when you know the quarterback, for instance, is going to have quick options available, because he can. There's short yardage situations. 3rd and 5, I can throw my quick out because I don't need time for routes to develop. Whereas if it's 3rd and 9 to 10, now I need routes to get downfield a little more, and I need more time in the pocket. I need to hold on to the ball a little longer. So blitzes actually will impact what I'm able to throw. So there's a lot of reasons, but I agree. Those things were definitely reserved a little bit. And who knows? Maybe they open up a little bit against Michigan. Maybe they save it for the next week after that. Who knows?
All right, give me some things you want to see them build on, some things you wanted to critique. What do they need to fix?
I think deep ball connections. I think especially the way they set up the run. They used the run, I should say. You can tell that the eyes were on the run game, and that the defense was kind of on their toes, leaning forward to get downhill. So if that's the case, when that's the case, the next step for any offense is to utilize the play action pass game, which involves a lot of deep shots going over the top of the defense. They need to connect on those. And Doug knows it. Coach Marion has mentioned it throughout camp. Pushing the ball down the field is something that's going to be required of the offense. And they were not efficient enough on the deep passes. And what's crazy about it is the feeling I got, and this is probably the feeling that Doug had at the end of the game, was like, man, that wasn't good enough. And you look at it, 11 for 18 isn't bad. Like, from efficiency standpoint, it's not awful. It's just the misses were just so glaring. It's like, why? Like, those are touchdowns that you missed potentially. So they hurt a little bit more. But the underneath game and some of the take what they give you passes that Doug completed were great. So there's that to build on. But I think the deep shots have to come. And then along with that, on the other side, I think for Coach Odom's liking, and for any defensive coordinator or defensive-minded coach's liking, I think there was a little bit of confusion in the secondary, a little bit too much. And there was a couple of plays that Bryant got off. And this is a talented passing offense. One of the more talented quarterbacks in the FCS level, in Zevi Eckhouse, was really limited for most of the game. But there were some plays where the receivers got away from him. And there's some guys with a little bit too much cushion as far as the coverage goes on the back end, whether it was coverage bust or just, slacken the tightness of the coverage on the back end. I would like to see that tighten up in the weeks to come.
I watched a lot of college football this weekend, and I was thinking with both Eckhouse and Ruggieri that they could be playing at a higher level. That they're actually, in Ruggeri's case, he was a walk-on. But both guys could have left this offseason and gone somewhere higher. So I think they faced, at least with those two guys, a pretty good combination. I thought their one running back who had bounced from Missouri to Fresno, actually, Bakar, and now on to Bryant. I thought he was pretty nice as well. And Jalen Dixon paid them a really big compliment, talking about how good the offensive line was for Bryant. So let's start looking ahead. And we'll get a little review of what happened against Bryant to kind of build towards Michigan. Remember, another Barry Odom radio show is coming up on Wednesday. That's September 6th, Parkway Tavern. Flamingo and 2:15, 6 o'clock start. We do every Wednesday at 6 o'clock. First, I had a chance to catch up with Devon Walden, who he's one of the ace guys on the special teams unit, and he's been that way for a couple of years. And they really, if you could give some sort of player of the game, I don't know who'd you guys wind up giving it to on radio?
I believe that the player of game ended up being Jacob DeJesus, and I could be wrong about that. I know he got my vote for play of the game with the kickoff return, but I think that was a pretty. It was between him and Jet. I think were the standouts of the ball game.
I gave it to DeJesus, and but thinking back, I probably could have done a unit of the game, because the special teams really did set up the whole thing. I mean, I was tracking the starting field position. It's pretty insane when you look at the chart. UNLV, I think, started once at their own 20. They also started once at their own 6, but that was also after a 4th down stop. And then it seemed like every other possession was somewhere between the UNLV 40 and the Bryant 35, or in a couple of cases even closer because of the long return by De Jesus. But yeah, having a chance to talk to Walden, I'm very much into this topic that we started a few weeks ago, kind of the life of the walk-on. So I actually started this part of the conversation asking how things have changed for the walk-ons, if they have at all, going from Marcus Arroyo to Barry Odom.
Since Coach Odom has got here, he's made the walk-ons feel like they're just scholarship players too. So since he's gotten here, I just feel like a regular player that just like everybody else, like a scholarship player. He does really well, providing us same treatment as everybody else.
And then what happens during the year with, like, we had a big discussion on our podcast about, just meals. Like, are you outside the team there? Do you still get to eat with the team? What happens with the walk-ons?
So since Coach Odom has been here, he's let the walk-ons actually get the same meals that the people on scholarship has gotten. So this year we have gotten to eat breakfast and lunch every day.
Yeah.
So that's good. But like previous years, we didn't have that. But I'm really thankful that we have that this year.
What is the vibe now around special teams? We heard about Shebas being awesome. Then we come out to practice, and I'm like, my God, they work on special teams a lot. So the fact that they're so pointed in terms of attention on special teams, what does that do for you guys in terms of being connected with the team and knowing how important it is?
Yes, and so Coach Shebas has been here. We've noticed a change in the focus of special teams, and we dial in on it heavily. The energy around special teams is just dominate every play, every special teams play, dominate it. We believe in the schemes. He hammers the schemes every day, and we feel like we can win games with special teams.
Why do you like it?
I like it because you can just run and hit.
Devon Walden's with us. What's Shebas like in terms of his delivery?
Shebas, he'll get you going. Shebas he's good at teaching technique and in all special teams, and he's really good at getting people going, getting the team up, making sure that you're bringing it every day.
For you, from a technique standpoint, like what did you have to work on? What have you gotten better at?
For special teams, me being like a gunner, really learning more releases, how to, I guess, attack leverages on like the jammers, and kickoff more just making sure I have a good inside-outside contain.
Who impressed you on Saturday at the Bryant game on the special teams unit in terms of getting down there and making tackles?
Rashad Tanner impressed me. He was flying down the field. I think he made 2 or 3 tackles on kickoff. Very, very good tackles on the other side of the field too.
We've never broken down special teams from this vantage point. What are the key positions of the guys who are pursuing? He mentioned some of the names, but on kickoff and punt returns.
So kickoff, just what I've noticed in being around the game, I never was a specialist. I wouldn't have called myself that, even in high school. But just some things that I've noticed as what makes it difficult for returners is lane discipline. You have to have guys that are in their lanes and discipline with that, because if you look at the way a kickoff starts, everybody lined up across, the whole field is covered with bodies, right? Like there's people at every gap. So lane discipline is one of those things where if somebody breaks the line, then there's a seam for a good returner to exploit. And that's kind of what kickoff return teams are aiming to do, is to part that line and create a division so the returner can squeeze through. So having good lane discipline is one thing. Then there's also this element of physicality, and it's more mental than anything. But if you're returning and you're watching guys flying and crashing into your players full speed, that deters you from going that way. It's a natural thing as a runner. Like, that guy just got creamed. That's not safe. Like, I'm gonna drift this way, right? Like, so. Like those are things that you need. You have to have your unblocked players, and there's always going to be a couple, at least one, on every special teams kickoff coverage. Is they have to squeeze appropriately, and it goes back to lane discipline and keeping your gaps, attacking with speed and discipline, and understanding kind of where you're trying to funnel the runner based on what the scheme is or where the ball was kicked and things like that. Good special teams units are together in that, where there's guys that are designed to be the physical guys. We used to call them wedge busters, but there's no wedges anymore. But there's guys that know they're taking up blocks. They're supposed to occupy blocks. Then your fast guys are usually the ones that are unblocked and running free and either contain or squeeze guys. And having discipline in that is the key, I think, on both units. And then the kicker, obviously, is the biggest weapon on that. The amount of hang time or where they place the ball kind of sets the whole scheme in motion. And if the ball is placed appropriately, then the team can kind of just gravitate to where they're supposed to go in the right way. It's more complicated than people think. It's not just run down there and tackle. There's so many different layers to it. And I watched, and this is one of the things because we were paying attention to it, I watched to see if it made a difference. And the way they cover, it wasn't just guys running down there fast. There was guys getting to a point, and then you could see they got to the point they understood at this point, we all need to gear down and start to squeeze toward the ball. At this point, I know I'm unblocked, and I know I can explode to the tackle because I know this guy is the contained guy, and this guy has this leverage. So you ended up seeing a lot of guys around the ball who were the same guys every time. And it was like, it does make a difference. Like the emphasis on this, where guys understood when and where to break down, when to engage blocks, which shoulder to attack when they're attacking the block. Because again, as a runner, you are taught to run at your guy's backs. Like if your guy's back is to you, then that means he's blocking somebody the opposite way. Now, if I can take on a block the right way, I can force the runner to say it's not safe to go that way. So then again, like I said, you funnel the runner to where you want to go, and then you funnel them to unblock guys, and it works perfectly. And it's no accident that UNLV was so good in the return game against a dangerous returner. All right, Anthony Frederick was a dangerous returner, and
we should mention that too, folks.
Up.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who averaged around 15 yards a return in this game. He was over 30 last year. So, I mean, that was a big deal. And, I think we're going to talk about special teams a lot this year. They've really dedicated to it, and I think they're going to be a good special teams unit. Watching the kickers, I think, is something to keep an eye on where they place the ball. Where Miano, who I think is going to be the main kickoff guy, kind of what the goal is, where they want the ball. Because the really good kickers, on the punting side, Matt Ariza was unreal in terms of placing the ball. The really good kickers on kickoffs can put the return man and the whole unit in jeopardy by, burying the ball at the, the 1, 2, or 3 yard line. So let's talk defense, because it was interesting when I looked at some of the PFF ratings. Some of the lower guys in terms of ratings were guys like Jalen Dixon, Jackson Turner by the numbers by PFF, didn't have a great game. So I caught up with Jalen Dixon, and we started off just mentioning, hey, against Bryant, what do you think of your performance?
Their game plan was to get the ball out fast, pretty quick. So I was trying my best to get back there, but as you can see, I didn't have the best game. So I'm looking to capitalize week 2, make a bigger jump from week 1 to week 2. So we're gonna see how things go.
Where did their quarterback have the most success?
It was more of an inside, but as long as we didn't have to do our job correctly. We went back and filmed, went over it, and we're making adjustments. So hopefully we can get that fixed by Michigan. So
how is McCarthy? I don't know how much you've gotten into Michigan yet, but how is their quarterback compared to this one in terms of the mobility?
Quarterback is a great quarterback, and he can use his legs as well. And he has a great arm too as well. So we just got to be prepared and make him feel uncomfortable. Move him off his spots and make him feel uncomfortable and make him feel like we're going to be here all day.
In the press conference, we were talking to Jalen Dixon. One of the media people said, something along the lines of "shock the world." You guys use that as motivation, or does it actually annoy you a little bit that people think, "Hey, this is an impossibility"?
A little bit of both, but at the end of the day, they are ranked number 2, and we want to come in there and we want to win. I guess you could say we want to shock the world, but at the end of the day, we want to prove to the world that we're going to be a great team this year, and we want to win championships.
So let's talk about the D-line in this last game and then kind of looking forward. We had talked about Whitmore, which, it's an interesting case. It looks like they went out and recruited for the 3-3-5 with guys they knew, right? Yeah. Cooper Webb was at a previous coach's school, and the same with Whitmore. What have both of those guys brought? Because they're rise up the depth chart to be, 2 and then heavily in a rotate. They were in pretty early.
Yes. Whit is a very shifty, quick guy. So he can his get off is great. So that it can cause an advantage and struggle for O-lines too as well. When we talk about Cooper Webb's very strong. Like he's very strong. So having Coop in the middle is a blessing because he's just so strong. He can move people around. So it benefits the whole D-line and the linebackers.
Yeah, I love a lot of the stories on this team because sometimes when there's a head coaching change, a lot of the guys can get real anxious and they're like, "Oh, I'm screwed, right? Am I going to be able to win over the new staff?" You guys have had so many people on this team win over the staff, and one of them is Tad Martinson.
Yeah.
And talking to Ricky Logo about a month ago, he's like, "Hey, Tad in the weight room, the strength was always there, and now he's brought the strength to the field." From a technique standpoint, what does that mean? Like, if he was strong, why wasn't he bringing it to the field? What does it mean?
Sometimes when you can be strong in the weight room, but there's what I say, you could be weight room strong and then you could be field strong. And where Tat needed to work on, he needed to bring that strongness from the weight room to the field, and now it's correlating.
So a lot of good stories, and Caleb, as we talked about the defensive line, what we talked about a lot was this is a deeper unit than it's been in the past. And I have no idea if this is the way it's going to play out moving forward. It was Bryant, so maybe they wanted to make sure everyone got in the rotation, got a feel for the game. Don't overplay them. I tweeted this out, but I'm going to read it here again on the podcast. Defensive line snaps. Dixon 41. So we're talking upwards of 60 plus plays. I think it was 63. Jackson Turner, I believe, was out there for every play. But Dixon 41, Darius Johnson 35, Tat 34, Webb 26. I don't have Whitmore in here. Oh, man. Igbase 18, Conley 12, Naki 5, and I'm sure Whitmore logged around high 20s. I can look it up. But I like the fact that they had that many guys in a rotation.
Yeah, there were times in the game where I noticed there was like wholesale changes on D-line. And it was like every D lineman came out and it was like, you watch it and you're like, is there going to be a fall off? Are they going to get pressure? Is it going to look different? And it didn't. It wasn't the case. And guys like Cooper Webb came in and it was like, okay, he's holding his own out there. He's doing his part. So the reps, and there's a time where you look out there and the starting D tackle was probably going to take closer to 58 of those snaps, right? At UNLV, and there was going to be limited rest, and guys are going to look gassed at the end of the game. That wasn't the case. And there was, when you're chasing around an athletic quarterback, the fatigue sets in a lot quicker, especially for the heavies up front. And then on top of that, when you're playing a lot of short yardage situations, again, the fatigue in the trenches is real. And you talk about the weight room strength and, what Tat Martinson did to improve and to make it to, and he ended up starting in this game, going from walk-on to a starter. There's a couple of former walk-ons that were starters for UNLV, and Tat was one of them. Jackson Woodard, of course, a former walk-on at one point. But when you look at the strength transitioning, one of the things we used to always say, and weights don't hit back, and it's one thing to be able to bench press, and it's like, but the bench press never attacks you, so the bench press will never double team you. But so that's one of the things you got to understand, how to throw your weight around, so to speak. And Tat's doing it, and Coach Logo was raving about him during the offseason, and other guys on defensive line as well, Darius Johnson and Cooper Webb. And I was glad to see guys like Fisher Kamak, who we talked about the potential there, and getting him out on the field and making plays, making tackles, batting passes down, things like that. It was like, okay, they're rounding into form, and the depth is very apparent for UNLV in the trenches. And Jalen Dixon, he talked about not having the best game and how the D-line had plenty to learn from and coach from. And we talked about the top. That's what you want. You want to win by 40 or 30, and then still have coaching still have points of emphasis. And the guys are ready to identify that they did things wrong, and willing to admit that, yeah, I could have done better, and we want to hone in and be better next time. So I imagine they will be. And I imagine there's some things that the heightened environment at Michigan, they're going to be fired up to play there. And then even going past that into the season, into conference play or wherever the next opponents are, I think the improvement's going to be steadily increasing. Remember, this is a new group. This is a new system. Both sides of the ball, they're still learning it. And, the install is kind of over, but they're still learning how it feels and how to adjust to things in game. So what we saw is just really the tip of the iceberg. And there's plenty to improve with all the units, but especially on the defensive line.
Yeah, looking at the numbers, they faced 72 snaps on defense. Turner led them with 63. Whitmore was right there with some of the other guys who logged upwards of 35. And Whitmore, overall defensive PFF rating, you start pushing 80 or above, or even to 90, means you had a really good game. Whitmore was 78.5, and Kamak played 13 plays, but was actually the highest graded dude on the defense, nearly a 79 at 78.9. And then, no surprise, Jere Williams was out there for the majority of the time, 59 plays, and was third on the team in terms of the PFF rating. And everyone knows I like PFF, especially like it when we're talking about the linemen, because it's kind of that area of the field you don't really get a chance to watch real closely unless you hone in on it. So this Michigan game, let's stick with defensive line talk as we talk about the Michigan game. One, they're massive. They have an unbelievable offensive line culture over the years, produced tons of NFL players. And behind them, their run game is really good. They've got big and small with, Blake Corum is amazing, had over 1,400 yards last year. Remember, he got hurt late in the year. Donovan Edwards, who's a beast with more size, he almost had 1,000 yards rushing. We'll get to McCarthy in a second, but I really think with Michigan, it starts with the run and that offensive line.
Yeah, and that's probably Big Ten football in general, outside of Ohio State. I think just about every team in the Big Ten will lean on the run heavier than most opponents across the country. But you talk about Blake Corum. This is a guy who you could legitimately say is an NFL running back, right? Like, if not for his injury, it's very possible he was in the draft last year and probably drafted high in the second round or first round, depending on, where people fell. But he was one of those guys that was a shoo-in for the NFL. And then, Michigan fans basically begged him to come back and re-up because they didn't get what they wanted done in regards to the national championship. And he decided to do it. So he's back, and 1,000-yard rusher. Donovan Edwards was no scrub in relief duty when when Corum went down. Then you complement that with a quarterback in McCarthy who's grown in terms of his ability to impact the game in really effective ways. And I just go back to last season when Ohio State in that rivalry game, and they committed basically full tilt to, like, we're going to stop the run. We're going to make you beat us, McCarthy. And they tested the pass game of Michigan, and he went out there and beat them essentially. And it was like, this guy's got something to him. And I think games like that throughout the season went towards his confidence and what he's grown into be, and the way he complements the run game, not just with the play action pass, but with his legs as well. So a tall task, not only the heaviness and the power and the force of Michigan, their offensive line, then you also have to worry about the contain elements for a guy like McCarthy, who can, if you give him an opportunity, make plays with his legs and with his feet to really be an impact player. So it's going to be a tough one for UNLV, and they're going to be not only tested physically but mentally, because it's a different thing to line up with 2-3 tight end sets for 3 plays in a row, where they're just trying to run it down your throat and really establish dominance. And not many teams can do it in today's game. Not many teams are willing to. Michigan is one of those, and that's why they're ranked as highly as they are in the nation. Number 2 in the nation. It's the highest ranked opponent UNLV's ever faced. So it's going to be a test, and it's early in the season, but I'm sure the guys are fired up about 100,000 plus fans to quiet down, and if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure there are some people who can think back to the last time UNLV went into Michigan. That was 2015 with Tony Sanchez. And boy, when I look back on the Michigan roster, they had some players, but not like now. That was Harbaugh's first year. He wound up putting together a really good year with Jake Rudock at quarterback. They went 10-3. And it also kind of shows what the Rebels' expectations have been over the years. And in that one, I mean, they lost 28-7. And I remember, since I'm like, they really hung with them. I mean, again, they didn't get blown off the field. The defense did a pretty good job. But he's reached another level with this program now. He just has. They're better all over the field. They're faster than they used to be, which is another key to kind of get back, up into that level, move past Ohio State and compete with Alabama and LSU and Georgia. So if we sound like we're not enthusiastic, I'm excited to go there. I'm excited to see the Rebels test themselves, but there's also being realistic in this game. This is a really, really tough test. And I hope fans remember it's only one part of the season. These are good tests. The school gets to make a lot of money off of these road trips. The kids, are playing college football for opportunities like this. I wanted to ask you, because I know you mentioned Wisconsin was one of the craziest road environments you'd ever been in. What is it like down on the field in terms of the noise? And my guess is, because of the way Michigan, because it's a traditional bowl, kind of like USC, Notre Dame had a second level. I didn't think Notre Dame was super, super loud, except for a couple of really big moments in the pregame and the postgame. What do you think it's going to be like noise-wise?
I think it's going to be loud. I think that the fact that the Big House, from what I know, it's sunken in, and the way, I guess, there's not to be like a super sound wizard or nothing, but the way acoustics work, the sound gets trapped in there a little bit better. So I imagine it will be very loud. It's early in the season. So and it doesn't matter really with these teams in the Big Ten where football is king. there's going to be 100,000 plus fans, regardless. And that's what they've said that they're expecting. So it's going to be loud. I think go back to Ohio State when we went there, that was 100,000 plus. I don't know exactly what the final tally was, but that was 100,000 plus in the Horseshoe, and it was loud. And that's from
it's loud there. I've been there. It's loud.
Yeah, so I imagine it will rival that. But it's an exciting thing. And down on the field, I know, Wisconsin was one of the louder places I played out. Camp Randall, West Virginia was also loud. But there's a certain energy and excitement that you thrive off of. And I don't want to say you don't hear it, because that's a lie. I think anybody says that, I'm in the game, I zone out, I can't hear it. That's a lie. You can absolutely, it drowns out things. So you have to definitely focus on it. But there are moments where it's almost surreal. And I loved it when you quiet the crowd. And people talk about it a lot, but it's like when you know how much it was roaring, and then you get a first down, and it's like, and you kind of hear, the sigh, like, darn it. And then you can feel their team also when they hear that silence, they're like, we're disappointing our fan. It hurts even more to convert a third down in that situation. So it's like, it goes both ways. If you can shut them up, there's no better feeling in sports, right? To be on the road and shut up 100,000 fans with a touchdown or a big play, it's awesome. There's nothing that beats it. But there's also a side that has to learn how to thrive when it gets loud. Like when that noise really starts to kick in, whether it's the silent count, the signals. There's times where even at Camp Randall, it wasn't 100,000 fans, but where you can feel the ground shaking, and it's like they're really into it. They're really fired up, and that's what you live for. I get excited. I'm a fan of college football, and I get excited about because I don't feel that you get that in the NFL with the way with the fan demeanor. It's just nowhere near. There's nothing like being in a packed college stadium, and that's what UNLV gets to play in front of. National TV, they get to play in front of that and put their talent on display, regardless of the outcome. Because, like you said, the rankings are not for no reason, right? They're one of the top teams in the nation, realistically. But putting a good show on, putting yourself on the map, guys that can make a name for themselves in this ball game, and then springboard into the rest of the season with a good outing. I think the potential is limitless in that regard.
So just so fans know, we're taping this on a Tuesday night. I was out at practice at UNLV, but it was deafening at practice. And then on top of that, the second practice field hadn't had the goalpost installed. So there was someone on one side like sawing or some kind of power saw, and then some kind of crane or something. I don't know. Some heavy machinery was on the left side as you're facing. I'm like, what is going on down here? But it was really freaking loud. Can we do this before we close out? Because we have a little extra time here for a couple minutes. I wanted to get your impressions on what's happened so far in the Mountain West. So on air today, these are very important things. Very important things. When I put out my rankings, you must listen. So I put together this. I mean, it's very early here, but it'll give us a chance to make a couple of comments about some of the other teams around the conference. I put together my 1 to 12 power ranking in the Mountain West Conference off of what I've seen early in the season, but you can't judge too much. I'll go from the bottom. New Mexico, again, hard to read. They have a new quarterback in, but man, they didn't do much in the air at all at Texas A&M, and Texas A&M has a great quarterback, and that environment's crazy. I've got Reno second to last. I will say the positive. Well, one, the negative was they couldn't run the ball at all against USC, and I think this wants to be a run-based team. Brendan Lewis is in from Colorado. They threw for 311. Now, a lot of that is garbage time stuff, and they had a couple of long pass plays, 77 and 73, but at least there's some signs there. The defense couldn't do anything, and the biggest problem with Reno now, I think, is dealing with all the coaching changes. To have your special teams coach change 2 weeks before the season, quarterback coach changes, so that's a rough opener when you're trying to. It's a bounce back year, and I don't think Rebel fans are going to be sad about this at all. That's 11 straight losses now for Nevada.
Yeah,
oof, no
tears shed here.
That's rough, especially from former players. So anyway, I'll go up the list real quickly here. I think I have Hawaii too low, but because I like the way they played in these two games, I think they've gotten a little gassed. Well, they got a little gas against Stanford. They actually had a lot of gas down the stretch against Vandy. I have CSU next, but man, the way they open really worries me. I have UNLV after that, so technically that's what the 8-hole. Utah State, I thought played really well and competitively at Iowa. How about Wyoming? comeback victory against Texas
double
Tech.
overtime. Yeah,
I thought, I was like, man, they get a Power 5 team to come into that place. That place is a hellhole. Those fans, it's a beautiful stadium. So hellhole's not, I don't mean it like in a mean way. It's just really a hard place to play. And they're one of those teams.
Air.
Yeah, that and then that's a good point too. I forgot about the elevation. So Mountain West Conference teams are. I mean, you can kind of be used to it. You're never fully used to it, but Texas Tech, I'm sure, was sucking wind down the stretch. After that, going up from 5-1, San Jose State, Boise. I'm worried about Boise. I know it was Washington, and it's not a complete shocker that they lost. It was the way they lost. I still don't know about Avalos. His Tukas was saved last year by Dirk Cutter, so we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
I have SDSU at 3. Idaho State by 8, and Maiden throws for 87 yards. That's a little worrisome. Air Force, and then, folks, anyone who wanted to write off Fresno, nice win on the road at Purdue. Not completely unexpected, but Mikey Keene goes out and throws for a zillion yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And Eric Woods, that's the right name. Eric Brooks, 7 catches, 170. And I always reference Fresno. I'm like, Jacob DeJesus, Dominic Jacinto, D'Angelo Irvin, all these guys are 5'8", 5'7", 5'9". Fresno lives off that stuff. So Who impressed you?
I will say Siobhan Cordero impressed me individually. So I think San Jose State suffers from the opponents that they played for the first 2 weeks. USC and Oregon State, tough matchups. Oregon State with a new quarterback in DJ Uyunglele. I think I said it right. DJ U. That's what they were calling him during the broadcast. But I think San Jose State is probably in my top 2. I would move them up just on the talent base. Yeah, I think they still got some talented pieces.
You're not worried about their defense? The more I start to think about it, I'm like, wait a second. They lost Cade Hall. They lost Fajoko. They lost Kyle Harmon. They lost one of their best players on the back end. This year is a big test. Yeah. If you're a top 4 or 5 program in the Mountain West Conference, I'm not saying you have to replace those guys exactly, but you better have some people in the pipeline to replace them. And I'm not sure they've done it so far.
Yeah, I don't, and that's why I'm not sure they've done it because of who they played. Oregon State is one of the best rushing offenses in the nation, and USC is number 6 in the nation, or they were at least at the start of the preseason when they played. So, they had a gauntlet to start. They put up, I don't know what the final score was, 20 points against USC, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. They got on the board, and I think they missed a lot of opportunities offensively to score. And Oregon State, I think, is a great defensive team. But I think they would be higher rated right now if I had to guess. Just on a talent, like just watching them play, I think they've got talent to get it done in conference. And they probably will make up a lot of ground in conference from this 0-2 start is kind of what I mean to say. Fresno State, I think, is the surprise to me because I wondered how they would replace their quarterback who was there for years and has now moved on to the New Orleans Saints. And he's playing in backup duty there. I think he made the roster. If I'm not mistaken on that. But replacing him, I think they showed in week 1, at least on the road at Purdue, that wasn't going to be an issue. They're going to be fine. I would probably move, just on your list, I would move San Diego State down behind Boise State because of the way that they beat Idaho State. Idaho State was a team that UNLV handled pretty easily last season, and it didn't look like SDSU had it all figured out against them. So I would give Boise the edge there, but it's barely, right? Like there's still some questions that need to be answered for both teams. But then I think from there down, I would agree with where you put everybody. I don't see a problem with anywhere. I think it's very competitive, I'll say. There's no team that's like head and shoulders above the rest. And that has happened in the past where like a healthy Fresno State was like not going to get dethroned, right? Or a Boise State in a few years back was like clear-cut favorite. I think of the top 4 or 5 teams, I wouldn't be shocked if anybody came out on top. And Air Force is one of those teams that nobody likes to play. Everybody hates the idea of playing them. So they can surprise any team at any given moment with that unique game style that they play with. But no, I don't disagree. I think the conference is wide open in terms of who's going to win it. I think teams that are outliers and maybe considered down the list on conference rankings, like a UNLV, who have the opportunity to surprise some people, I think, because of the wide openness of it, because the question marks that teams in front of them have. And then because of their schedule, I don't think they'll play San Diego State this year. So things like that, I think, will benefit them. They play Colorado State at home for the first time. They haven't played Colorado State for a while because COVID year, the year that they were scheduled to, they didn't play them. So games like that are now part of the schedule, I think, are beneficial. And then getting a peek at Hawaii and seeing what they're about. I think there's opportunities. There's opportunity for movement.
It's going to be a good year.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good year.
Very unpredictable because I still think Nevada and New Mexico are going to upset the apple cart with some good performances. I think Hawaii can step up and beat almost anyone. And, at the top, we mentioned some of the offensive and defensive flaws on certain teams. And there's some tests this week. You mentioned some of the matchups. Boise hosts Central Florida. They're 3.5-point dogs at home. San Diego State gets UCLA at home. They're, as we're taping this, 13.5-point dogs at home. There better not be, 15,000 UCLA fans and less than that in terms of San Diego State fans. They need to show up to their games. That's they got a good program. That's kind of outrageous to see that place with freaking 15,000 people in it. So, but yeah, this season's lining up as an awesome one, and we'll get a better read here the next couple of weeks. So, Caleb, great job. Enjoyed the call. I know I was over on TV, but I was listening back to the radio call. You guys did a brilliant job of describing the action. A good win over Bryant. Make sure you listen on Saturday. Again, reminder: pregame starts a little earlier now. We're doing an hour pregame, home and road. The Learfield UNLV football pregame show brought to you by Ted Weens. So let me do all the math. Eastern time. Okay. 8:30? Do I have that right? 8:30 pregame Vegas time.
I think that's right. I think
on ESPN 1100.
3 hour time. Yep. Good math.
Going to be good to go. Believe me, be happy that, I noticed today that even though the game's been hyped up a lot, Colorado is hosting Nebraska at 10 o'clock local time. It's a 10 a.m. Mountain Time start.
That's early.
It's way too early. So, which, by the way, before we close, give me a couple of thoughts on Deion, because I trashed them. I didn't like what they did. By the way, I'm not going to apologize because the story's not done yet. I believe I got two people today to get way too fired up about Deion and how good Colorado's going to be. So their win total was sitting down at 3.5. I got two bets in today with a guest and our buddy Damon at 7. I took the under 7 wins. It's one game.
Yeah,
relax.
It's one game, and it's a game in which they gave up 40-plus points. You won, but you gave up 40-plus points. And I don't think anybody should realistically say that that's a formula, right? Like, you got your best player going two ways. It's early in the season. How long is that going to last? How long before he gets gassed? So I'll say this. He kept receipts, and good for him. You were on one of those receipts, Steve. Congratulations if he heard it. But
he proved me wrong in game one because I thought they would get boat raced by 28, 31 points. And I'll say this, Deion can puff out his chest, but his son is really good. To any type of opponent like that, like TCU, not TCU of last year, but 510 yards and 4 touchdowns. That kid's really, really good. And you mentioned Hunter. That's outrageous.
Yeah,
to play 144 plays and have that impact on offense is crazy. So just leaning on those two guys, they're going to win some games.
Yeah, they're going to win some games. It's not sustainable to call it a winning program. I don't think he's completely turned the ship around. It's a great win. I don't want to discredit what it was. It's a great win, a great way. First of all, it's a great pregame speech. I listened to his pregame speech and I got kind of fired up about it. I was like, oh my God, that's a great one. I see what you did there, Prime. But no, I think he had a lot of naysayers and he gets his opportunity now to throw it back in their face. And you knew it would come. If he ever had any inkling of success, it would come. That's just who he is. His personality is bigger than life. It always has been. But again, hold your horses. It's week 1. Nobody had any film on this team. Nobody knew what they would be game plan wise. But we'll see how it goes. I'm not going to say I'm a hater or anything like that, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. You got one. You're 1-0. What's going to happen the next time out? You're going to have to go through the Pac-12. You don't play SC this year. You'd be thankful for that. But what do you do at the end? That's what I want to look up before I say the season or the transfer or his method was a success at this level. We'll see. Right now, It looks awesome. It's a great story to follow and good for Colorado as a program, as a university. The dividends are returning quickly for them. I think biggest crowd that TCU's ever had at their home for a home game for them. I think Dion and his team had a lot to do with that.
Yes.
And I imagine that it's going to be rocking in Colorado when they come home and have that game. So good for them. Good for their program.
Yep. It's a cool story. We got a guy who, serves both roles as someone you root for, and also other people are going to think he's a villain. And by the way, they do play USC, so they could start 3-0. Nebraska, Colorado State up next, at Oregon, then home against USC. So something good for college football. It's back. Everything is good about college football. Caleb, I'll see you.